You're listening to the Mindful Mama Podcast, episode 109.
Today we're talking about the yes brain with Dr. Dan Siegel. Welcome to the Mindful Mama Podcast. Here it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you're thriving, when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clarkfield's Mindful Mama mentor. I coach overstressed moms on how to cultivate self-awareness in their daily lives and to take family and life to a new level of peace and cooperation. I've been practicing yoga and mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course, and I'm the mom of 2 girls who challenge me every day to hone my craft. For sure. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the Mindful Mama podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're new, welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here we have interviews and we have conversations and we have solo podcasts. And today is an interview with the one and only Dr. Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel is known as a mindfulness expert and for his work developing the field of interpersonal neurobiology. Dr. Siegel is a founding co-director of the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. He has written 5 parenting books, including 3 New York Times bestsellers, Brainstorm, The Whole Brain Child, and No Drama Discipline, and Parenting from the Inside Out with Mary Hartzell. Dr. Siegel's unique ability to make scientific concepts exciting and accessible has led him to be invited to speak to everyone from Pope John Paul II to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. His latest book is The Yes Brain: How to Cultivate Courage, Curiosity, and Resilience in Your Child with Tina Payne Bryson.
I can't wait for you to hear this conversation and learn the importance of that yes brain versus the no brain and how we can build resilience in our children and how we can use our minds to actually change the brain's function and structure. Wild, right? And it applies it all to parenting. It's really, really a valuable conversation. Before we jump into this conversation, I just want to let you know that right now, if you're listening to us when it comes out live, we are in the midst of the Mindful Parenting free live training week. You can jump in and join the last few days if you like. It's at mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. And Mindful Parenting course is opening at the end of this week. So chances are you might be listening when the Mindful Parenting course is open for registration. You can join and transform your parenting. We use all of the things we talk about here in this episode, and you learn not only to use communication skills that make it so you don't have to be the enforcer anymore and you don't have to threaten anymore, but we also learn those mindfulness skills and those self-compassion skills to help you turn down your reactivity and help you access that prefrontal cortex part of the brain, which we'll talk about in this episode. So if you're interested in that, go to mindfulparentingcourse.com. If you want to join the free training, go to mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. And now on to this episode. All right, Dan Siegel, thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Great to be here, Hunter. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive in, I just have to tell you, I've got a stack of like 3 or 4 books here on my desk. I'm such a big fan. I'm so excited about the new Yes Brain book, and I really want to talk about that. But I also I'm curious about your own history. Like you dove into parenting and all of this research and all of this stuff so thoroughly in your own life. I wonder, how were you parented? Was your interest in this an extension of like a really positive, connected relationship, or were you in reaction to unskillful parenting in your own childhood?
Well, that's a question I usually don't address in a public forum. Personal thing. So while I talk about my own parenting experience as a parent or, raising my kids, I talk about that. I kind of honor the privacy of my parents. So I actually don't talk about that.
Okay, I totally will honor that privacy as well. I think for me, my curiosity about that is coming from reading parenting from the inside out and knowing that that history is so valuable. It's been that work you've done with that has been so valuable to me, like addressing those questions about understanding what our own baggage is in so many ways. I think that's incredibly valuable. But let's dive into this idea with the yes brain and the no brain. And I think this is so interesting. So I was wondering, if you can tell the listener, what is this idea of the yes brain versus the no brain?
Well, what I experienced as a professional was, on a number of levels, focused very deeply into this idea that the brain, relationships, and the mind are woven with each other, not the same thing. And that in workshops, when people realize the brain can be in a reactive state where you're not open to new things and you're getting ready to deal with threat, if you knew that reactive state was there in yourself, you could find a way to come out of it and then move yourself to the other state, which is a receptive state. And so in workshops, the way I found it helpful to have parents or clinicians learn about these two states is to say no really harshly several times, and then to say yes in a soothing way many times, and then to have people experience the difference between the no brain, is what you could call it, brain state that's created when someone says no harshly, and the yes brain, this state of mind that's created with certain neural firing and that happens in a certain relational context that's allowing you to be receptive and open and connecting. So, for example, when someone makes sense of their life, like your first question is asking about making sense of life, and as a professional, I'm so out in the world, I found it very useful to teach people about these things, but also important to clarify what's personal information and what's professional work. And in that clarity, you can also understand how people can move into deep understandings in their own life, but that understanding doesn't mean they share with their children what happened to them in their own parenting. So when we say make sense of your own life, it doesn't mean dump your own issues and worries about your childhood onto your children. It means make sense of your life so you can develop this yes brain state yourself. So doing the workshop of yes brain and no brain is so interesting because it gives people direct access to the receptive state of mind, which is really the brain state, the yes brain state of presence and parental presence, being open and available to your child is the best gift you can give them. And it also turns out to be a gift you can give yourself as well.
Yeah. So that idea of no is this idea of resistance, and we're tensing and clenching and tightening ourselves, and that's reflected in the brain. And then you take this idea of the yes brain in the book and the no brain into this idea of cultivating it in our children. And so I wonder if you could talk to this idea of like why we should cultivate this idea of this receptivity and this presence and this connecting in our children specifically, and also in ourselves.
Well, when you're aware of these two states, the no brain state of reactivity, which shuts you down, and the yes brain state of being open and connecting to oneself and also to others, that's the first stage of learning when to engage, let's say, with other people, let's say your child, so that if you're in a no brain state, that's not a good time to be parenting. And learning the techniques to not only be aware of that state, but to transform the no brain reactivity into yes brain receptivity. That's what the Yes Brain book is all about, with very specific skills that you learn as a parent, of course, for yourself, but also how to teach those skills to your child so she or he can, learn to recognize these states, to embrace them for what they are, but then to move from the reactivity to receptivity.
Thinking about the listener who's listening and saying, well, I've got this like 2-year-old that's saying no to everything and all of these things are driving me crazy. And I don't want to be receptive to my child, like not wearing shoes to school or deciding to throw their stuff all over the floor. Like, what do you say to that parent who's saying, like, who's really questioning this idea of being receptive and how that plays out in sort of the nitty gritty of parenting life?
Well, Hunter, that's a really great question. And when Tina Payne Bryson, my co-author, we were concerned that name would basically make parents think it was permissive parenting, book was all about, or that we were testing was the way to go. And children need structure. And the yes brain approach is absolutely not about permissive parenting. It doesn't mean you say yes to everything. So we try to make it very clear in the very first page of the book that this is not about permissive parenting. It's about really learning 4 basics of a yes brain, which spell the word BRIE, the cheese, BRIE. It's a cheesy acronym, but it's balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. And when you learn that these are skills you as a parent can teach your child, then it really empowers you to say, I can create structure, so it's not permissive parenting, while also teaching my child the way I can be attuned to them and connect to them so that they achieve a kind of internal balance. I can actually teach them skills to widen what I call a window of tolerance, this way to embrace, let's say, sadness or anger or fear, and not become dysfunctional with it, but actually sit with it. So that's resilience, to widen that window. Insight is to give them the skills of knowing what's going on, not only right now, but to understand the past so you can free yourself up in the future. That's insight. And then you build the skills of empathy, the E of BRIE, with basically moving from a focus on one's own internal life with balance and resilience and insight, now building on that capacity to tune into the inner life of someone else, to be also concerned about their welfare and be compassionately engaged in action to help support the well-being and reducing the suffering of other people. So that's empathy in a nutshell.
I've been really interested in the idea of empathy, right? And that empathetic response with kids and things. And sometimes we talk about this idea of the development in the brain of kids, right? And the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop till they're in their 20s and all of that. And yet maybe these are kind of the seats of these things, right? Isn't the seats of empathy and insight and all those things. So how young can kids develop some of these things if their brain is still physically developing this capacity?
Well, I think the first place to start with that really intriguing question is to say that the brain is developing based on 2 things. One is genetic information that forms things like our temperament and some of the timing of how we develop. And the second thing is, the experiences we have. And those, because we're social beings, are dominated by our relational experiences. And so you as a parent can't do much once you've picked the sperm and egg that are going to form your child. There's not that much you can do with their genes. So that's going to be something that makes every child unique and different. But the experiences you can influence include how you tune into your child as early as, when they're first born. So tuning into their internal state, not just responding to their external behavior, but tuning in and speaking about the internal life of the mind. We can just call that a reflective dialogue. That actually encourages the development of the child's own reflective skills. And skills are really what we aim to develop as parents. So all these things begin really from the first days of life. So my own kids, my in-laws would say, hey, don't hug your kids. You're going to spoil them. And they were just 4 weeks old, and I would say to them, and as an attachment researcher, actually, you can't spoil a child in the first year of life. The research shows the more you hug your child and give affection to your child, actually the more, and I don't usually use this word, but self-reliant. I don't like the word self used that way, but the more kind of at home in their own skin and feeling at ease and clear and able to have this balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. All those yes brain skills happen when we give affection to kids. So it happens from the very beginning is the answer to the question.
Yeah. And you're talking about that idea of that just reflecting back their emotional state we can do that from the very beginning, but that's part of what helps to bring them into, you talk about the red zone, the green zone, the blue zone. Maybe you should explain what that is for the listener.
Yeah. So what's really interesting in terms of like thinking about your own brain, you may notice as Hunter and our listeners may appreciate this too, is that there are kind of 3 places we can get into in our lives that are remarkably consistent across individuals and even within an individual. And those are times when you're chaotic, where things are really flooding you and intense and very difficult to predict. So we can use the word chaos. Sometimes those are like super energized, but sometimes not. So some people call it hyper arousal, but that doesn't really fit completely. But that's a rough estimate. So things are really at least randomly activated, even if they're quiet about it. And then there's at the other extreme from chaos is completely predictable, where things are in a pattern that is something you can rely on over and over again. It just doesn't change. Even when it should be changing, it doesn't change. So it's rigid, right? So it's not just the idea of solid and stable, where you're a solid person. No, we're talking about like rigid. So these two extremes, at the one hand, you've got chaos, the other, rigidity, are like banks of a river. And the third state we can get into, this central flow of the river, is what you could just think of intuitively as harmony. It has 5 characteristics that spell the word faces. So it's flexible, it's adaptive. There's a math term called coherent, which basically means resilient over time. It's energized, a sense of vitality, and it's stable. So not meaning it's rigid, but stable, meaning you can rely on it to be flexibly adaptive and everything like that. You can turn to that state. And that state, interestingly, is a state that is created with a process called integration, the linking of differentiated parts and the balancing of this differentiation and linkage. And there's a bunch of brain science about that, and there's a bunch of mathematics about it. And I'm an attachment researcher. There's a bunch of attachment research you can use to look at that. But in terms of how we try to articulate this in the book, people like colors sometimes. And so we call that central integrated flow of harmony the green zone, like for go, green for go. And the people often associate the color red with chaotic stuff, like, oh my God, it's out of control. So we call it the red zone. And then this kind of cool down, rigid, like an iceberg, not changing, although an iceberg changes, but something solid and rigid, not solid in the stable sense, but rigidified and unchanging. We just call that the blue zone, just to make it accessible in the book. But in other books, what I do, like The Developing Mind, the textbook, I basically talk about chaos, that'd be the red zone, rigidity, that's the blue zone, and then the green zone is basically the integrative state of the faces flow, flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. So that's the science behind the simple terms of these colored zones.
And so our goal as parents, as you articulate really beautifully in the book, is to help our kids be in the green zone, help ourselves be in the green zone. And you talk about some different ways that we can do that. So what are some of the different ways that we can develop that, that resilience and that. Well, let's talk about resilience. What are the ways that we can develop some resilience in our kid? It doesn't mean that we are, and I like the way you talk about this in the book too, like you're talking about, it's very much the middle path, which I appreciate very much. The idea of not all holding their hand and helicoptering, and it's not all this idea of pushing them out there and do it on your own kid. But you talk about this idea of the middle path. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think the middle path is a great way of summarizing it. And the thing that's, it's kind of like this. It's like, as a parent myself, I think I share with a lot of us as parents, is in the thick of parenting, it's hard sometimes to remember the clarity of mind when you've entered the red chaotic zone or the blue rigid zone. So anything we can do to support each other as parents, and I certainly feel this as an educator, in terms of your first question about my own history, I feel inside of me kind of badly that I didn't respond to your question with some kind of psychotherapeutic outpouring of revelations. So that's part of my mind is still kind of stuck in the blue zone of that. But I'll just say this, that, I think everyone has challenges in their lives in various degrees. And of course, the challenges in my own life influence and inspire my everything, my walks around the block, my way I'm parenting, the way I have a romantic relationship. They influence everything. And of course, it influences my professional life. And so, part of what I love about the work on the mind is that, of course, it can be deeply satisfying personally. And I've been incredibly grateful to connect with people in these conversations about like parenting from the inside out with Mary Hartzell, just the idea of a journey for understanding yourself. And so what we can do is invite people to understand things like how their own experiences as a child influence them. But also, as a scientist, I find part of my role is to try to translate the science. So for parents, the thing I think that's so accessible is to say, look, there's a yes state and a no state. And a no state has two forms, chaos, red, or rigidity, blue. And your first task as a person on the planet, whether you're a parent or a professional of any sort or a politician or whatever you are, your first obligation for our role in a human family is to say, am I in this no brain state or am I in a yes brain state? Because nothing very positive happens in a no brain state. So in terms of your question about teaching kids resilience, it starts with us. And this is why Tina and I put in the book time to reflect on your own skills this way. Mary Hartzell and I put it throughout Parenting from the Inside Out. And the idea there to build resilience is, if you picture these zones, right, the green in the middle, flanked on either side by red and blue, our task as parents is for the balance part, to teach kids what it feels like to be in that green zone. And when they get out of the green zone, return to the green zone. That's what we call balance. And there are certain brain mechanisms that allow you to do that you can teach as a parent. And the second thing you're asking about resilience is, if you can imagine this green zone, this river of integration that's flowing, you want to widen that river. You want to, let's take sadness, for example. If there's a family where someone's own history of loss make it so sadness was absolutely overwhelming and needs to be gotten rid of at all costs, and they haven't made sense of their life from an inside-out approach yet, then when they have children and their children are sad, and the sadness in the child evokes sadness in the parent, because that's what we do, we connect with each other that way, and that parent has a hot button issue for sadness, then what's going to happen in that family is the width of that green zone for the state of sadness is going to be super, super narrow. And to build resilience in that family, for that parent and for that child, the way to think about it is you want to widen that, I call it a window of tolerance. You want to widen that green zone width. And here's how you do it. Let's say sadness comes up. First of all, you have to do your own work yourself. And it's like the first question you asked, how does your parenting of origin influence you? Of course, it influences everyone. So understanding how it influenced you is what's so important to do. That's what the research shows, and that's what clinical experience shows. So that's the first step. So you say, okay, well, I had a loss when I was a child, so sadness is really hard for me, and so I got to work on the sadness. So you do that work. Okay, now how do you build that in your child? Your ability to sit in awareness with the emotion of sadness and not yourself get into the red zone or the blue zone is what your child will pick up from you. So in an interaction, once you've done that internal work, because if you haven't, what I'm about to say won't fly. It's not going to work. But if you have done that work, this is what you can do. Your child falls down and hurts themselves and feels sad that they can't go ice skating now because they have a bloody knee, because they scraped their knee hiking on a path or something. Or, a friend doesn't come over for their birthday party because the friend has the flu. Whatever the sadness is evoked by, and your child's going into the red zone. So some parents, what they do, and this we would call a no-brain approach, is yell at the child for being upset and sad at a friend who had a flu and say, that's stupid, your friend didn't cause the flu, and don't be a spoiled brat or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or, let's just stay with that example of the flu, or the child would just start sulking in the back. Maybe wasn't really screaming and crying in a red zone state. They were in a blue zone state and rigidly not interacting with the other friends at the party. So what that tells you is that your child has left the green zone of integration, and they can't embrace this emotional state of sadness. Now, at that moment at the party, you'll just do what you need to do. But in general, if you're going to build the skill of resilience, you would want to have an experience. You could probably do this at the party too. You'd want to sit down with your child and say, tell me what you're feeling. Well, Billy isn't here at the party because, he said he was going to be here, but he's not here. And then instead of saying, that's stupid, why are you such a spoiled kid? No, you don't say that. It's a no-brain response. You say, tell me more about that. Oh, I'm so sad he's not here. I love Billy. I wanted to be here. And so with a practice we call the wheel of awareness, you say, yes, of course, you're sad that Billy's not here because you so love Billy and you wanted him to be here. Yeah, that's right. So you're naming the feeling of sadness. And then you're saying, let's just sit with the sadness. So you're not giving him a timeout and you're not yelling at him and you're not telling him he's stupid for having this feeling, which a lot of parents do. You're saying, tell me more about that feeling. And so you're respecting the differentiated internal state of your child. You're not overwhelmed with sadness that's throwing you into rigidity because you've worked on your own issues. So you're sitting with your child's sadness and helping them explore that. And what that does is the isolation your child felt when his friend couldn't come to the party and the abandonment and betrayal and sadness and all that stuff, instead of being alone and being given a timeout, they're now with you. So they feel connected to you. And now you're helping them explore the internal world. And what you're doing is you're teaching them, and literally would change the connections in the brain, you're teaching them that the feeling of sadness can be experienced without being thrown into the non-integrated, chaotic red zone or shut down, rigid blue zone. And you're literally widening the intensity of sadness that they can allow themselves to become aware of without becoming dysfunctional. So he can say, I was really sad that Billy didn't come, and I also love Billy and I hope he gets over his flu because I can't wait to show him all these fun things we were doing at the party when he's better.
Yeah. So that your child's feeling seen. It's all about healing through that relationship. If you've done that healing work in yourself, so you can be non-reactive. It's like healing through that relationship. I'm seeing you. I'm hearing you. I'm there to be grounded when you're not.
Exactly. Yeah. And that gives you, Hunter, it gives you as a parent, is what Tina and I try to do in the book. It gives you very specific skill building practices so that you see parenting as an opportunity, of course, of seeing your child, of soothing your child, of keeping your child safe so they're secure. That's all beautiful and powerful stuff. You're also building skills. And when you see parenting as a skill building opportunity, you actually see what are sometimes the hardest, challenging moments as actually those moments that invite deep learning of skills. So it's a really fun turnaround so that we see a lot of parents who felt burdened by their parenting role, who felt confused about what to do. And, whether it's a whole brain child or no drama discipline or yes brain or, that I did with Tina or parenting from the inside out, all of those books, or Brainstorm even, all of these books are trying to empower parents to learn just a little bit of the basic established science that is often not talked about. So that, as Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. You will, as a parent, learning these yes brain skills, have a very different and empowered way to approach your parenting.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have to share with you, when my daughter was really little, my baggage that I had left over was a lot of anger. And when her anger and frustration arose, I got angry at her for being angry, which makes so much sense. But It was just like, it was ridiculous, and I knew it was harmful and I knew it was ridiculous. And I did a lot of work to work on that myself. And I wonder about that because it's interesting because I've seen her now that she's 10, I've seen huge transformations in her. And I think I've definitely seen her window of tolerance widen. But, sometimes I think parents, we read the information, some of the science that is out there sometimes about attachment, and we get scared that, oh my God, we're young, when our kids are young, we're all figuring it out and we're learning all these lessons and all these challenges are coming up. I've totally messed it up because these first 3 years are the most important. Can you just talk briefly to that? Like, this is an ongoing learning opportunity, right? And an ability for us to change and grow.
Yes, there are two sides to it. It's always possible to make changes. So, I have adults who bring in their adult, of course, parents, and we do family work around trying to make sense of what happened, because for the most part, most human beings have good intentions. And there's just stuff gets in the way. And part of this whole thing we're talking about is, how you can use your mind to get over the learned brain stuff that gets in the way. And this is the amazing thing, that the mind can actually change the brain's function and structure. So it's a very exciting moment. And so you're talking about, in your case, that anger was a leftover issue, and that then, of course, became an issue for your daughter, because that's exactly what happens. It's very powerfully described in your example of yourself. And what it invites us to consider then is that, and this is why I never would have written a single parenting book had I not written in Parenting from the Inside Out first, because it's exactly what you're saying. Doing the internal work first is what's necessary. And, a lot of parents don't want to hear that. They don't want to do that. And they want to say, help me fix my child, or tell me just what to do. But in fact, it isn't so much about the doing, it's about the being. Like, who are you as a person, as a parent? And so that's the inside out, parenting from the inside out approach. And once you embrace that, then all the strategies of integration we're talking about here, like, for example, the yes brain approach, then you start applying those just as you're saying. But no matter how much you might do that, if you don't take the time to say, hey, anger is an issue for me, and you start yelling at your child for being angry, you can see the vicious cycle that gets into. And so in terms of your question about the timing, yes, earlier the better, for sure, but it's never too late. And the second thing is, there's no such thing as perfect parenting. So being kind to yourself and realizing we're all human and make bloopers. That's why I always put, with my children's permission, or in the old days when they were giving me permission, I would always put times when I really messed up as a parent. It was my error and then my effort to make a repair. And I really feel it's crucial for any parent to realize that you're doing the best you can, and you can learn strategies for deepening your own self-understanding and how you make a repair with yourself and with your child when things don't go as well as you hope they would.
Daniel, or Dan, do people call you Daniel or Dan?
My mom calls me Daniel when she's mad at me.
Okay, so I won't call
But most people call me Dan, and my friends from high school call me Danny.
All right.
Depends on what mood you're in.
I can't thank you enough. I really admire your work, and it's really, I feel emotional because it's really made such an incredible, heartfelt difference in my own life. And I've been sharing your resources with so many of my clients, and in the mindful parenting course that I teach, I share these resources. And this work, I feel like I just want to thank you, because the work that you've put out there has made an incredible difference in the world, of the clarity and the insight and the ways that you get across these ideas that can be very complex in such an accessible way. It makes a huge, huge difference to so many people, and it's making incredible ripple effects. So I'm just so grateful for this work that you've done.
Well, thank you, Hunter. Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you speaking about it. And I'm very grateful that it's of service to other people, and that means everything to me. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And so, people go out, listener, please go out and get the Yes Brain. It's great. Definitely read Parenting from the Inside Out. Obviously, it's a great resource. Is there any other ways that you'd like to direct people to find your work, Dan?
If you want to go to my website, drdansiegel.com, DrDanSiegel.com. We have got a bunch of things you can do for parents. There's all sorts of, if you get interested in this stuff, there's in-person things, there's courses you can take, that it depends on your style of learning. So I try to do all these things as audiobooks and video programs. And so whatever fits with who you are, we try to make those kinds of things available to you, and just check them all out on our website.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really, really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you so much, Hunter. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't you love Dr. Siegel, and his way of putting things so clearly and beautifully is amazing, and I'm so appreciative for this conversation. If you want to learn more, if you want to implement the stuff we talk about in this conversation, go to mindfulparentingcourse.com. We are opening the course for registration. It'll be open for a few weeks. And if you are able to jump into the last few days of the free training, go to mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. But check out the course because these are relationships for life, right? And, we can't help our reactivity and this is our biology, but we can do something about it. It's there. These are the cards we are dealt, but we can change. We can use our mind to change our brains, just as Dr. Siegel said. So learn more about it over at mindfulparentingcourse.com. As always, if you have questions, send them over to me, Hunter, at mindfulmamamentor.com. And I really appreciate your ears today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please share it around with your friends. It's eye-opening, right? It kind of changes the way we look at things. So please do that. And please have a beautiful week. Take care of you. Create that peace and groundedness in yourself, and I'm so glad to have been able to connect with you. I really love the way that, we get this intimate connection through the podcast. I really appreciate you there on the other end. I feel your presence, and it makes it incredibly valuable for me. So I hope to connect with you over the Mindful Parenting course, and I wish you a really beautiful week. Namaste. Are you frustrated with parenting? Do you want to practice conscious, compassionate parenting, but you don't know how? It's not easy, and there's no roadmap for this. Until now. I'm Hunter Clark-Fields, creator of the Mindful Parenting course, and I know how frustrating it is because I've been there. I struggled as a young mom, and when I found myself yelling and triggered by my child, I knew there had to be a better way. And there is. Mindful parenting is different from other parenting trainings. They don't tell you that all that good advice is as good as useless when our internal stress response is triggered. Mindful parenting teaches you research-based tools and practices to reduce your stress response so that you can respond rather than react. And it teaches you exactly what to say so that you can create willing cooperation from your child. You can learn more and enroll at mindfulparentingcourse.com. And you can join us for a free live training where you'll learn why your kids don't listen to you, what punishment really teaches, the parenting truth that every pediatrician gets wrong, and the hidden myth that undermines your parenting. Sign up now at mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. That's mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. I'll see you there.